Today's guest started his side hustle journey about 5 years ago, and today it is his primary source of income. We are joined by the founder of Podmatch, PodPros, and Podcast SOP, Alex Sanfilippo. I think you're really going to enjoy this episode if you're into podcasting, and if you're finding and looking for ways to turn podcasting into a big source of income, into your primary source of income, this episode's going to be for you. We're actually going to start the episode talking about persevering and turning those failures in that side hustle into your primary source of income. And then we're going to talk about the top reasons why podcasters quit and how to avoid them. You're going to enjoy this episode. Stick around. Podcasters rejoice. Today we're joined by Alex Sanfilippo. He is the founder of Podmatch. He is the founder of Podcast SOP and the founder of PodPros. So today we're going to talk about how to create an awesome podcast and keep that podcast going. Alex Sanfilippo, what up?
Mark, so glad to be here, man. I've got to say this quick disclaimer before we get started. I jumped on Clubhouse, I like to think, pretty early on, as did you. And there is not a better Clubhouse host or whatever they're called, right? The person that runs the room than you. I mean, Mark, you are like the man for the job. I remember that was my first introduction to being on Clubhouse. Like I jumped in a room with you. I'm like, this is awesome. I'm like, these guys are so high quality. The next like 30 rooms I jumped in, I'm like, this guy isn't Mark or this lady isn't Mark, you know, like just never heard the quality again, man. But anyway, love what you do here, man. Love the show. Huge fan and just honored to be here.
Yeah, but look, the pleasure's all mine. And thank you so much. I appreciate the kind words. I still am on Clubhouse every Saturday at 10 a.m. Eastern. We've got a room there, although I am looking to ramp up with more Clubhouse rooms in the future. We'll see.
All right. Love it, man.
Yeah. So I just want to, I guess, lay this up a little bit, Alex. I was really excited to chat with you because I'm always excited to chat with people that turn side hustles into full-time incomes. And some of the things you're doing, I want to talk a little bit more about Podmatch, Pod SOP, and the value that's there, because it's very, very interesting. But I want to kind of go back in time. All right. So hop in your DeLoreans, everyone. We're going back to the future. And I want to talk about Alex making that shift. I was listening to one of your episodes, and I'll actually put a link below. It's about how to leave your day job. And you mentioned that there was this point in time where you decided, I no longer want to be an employee. I want to turn my side hustle into my full-time income. So take me back in a time, and what was it like making that decision?
Yeah, so I did 15 years in the aerospace industry, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I should mention that up front here, Mark, that from day one till the end when I left at year 15, I thoroughly enjoyed it. And actually the last year I was there was my best performing year out of all of those years. And I started as like a part-time receiving guy, worked my way up to the executive level. And when I left, it was like a bittersweet day. So I'm going to mention that. But the first 10 years of it were really cool. And when I reflect now and think why I enjoyed them so much, is because it was a privately owned small company for aerospace. I mean, it's still like millions and millions of dollars or tens of millions of dollars, whatever it was bringing in every year. But for aerospace, it was a small organization. And so for me, I just loved being able to almost be an entrepreneur inside of a company. Like I could still be like, let's try this. And 30 to 50 people would try it the next day, right? Like I like that. Yeah. At year 10, we actually sold and we got bought out by a really big multi-billion-dollar organization. So we went from like tens of millions to billions of dollars. And I remember one quarter I had this idea that I implemented, and we had like these pretty aggressive goals, new awesome thing that saved us 10% in one of our divisions of the company, which 10%, like when you're talking millions of dollars, like that's good money. I brought it to my CEO. I was like, man, look what we did this last quarter. He's like, yeah, I know. And I was like, he seemed like he was not happy about it. I'm like, well, no, we saved 10%. We didn't lose 10%. We saved it. He's like, no, I know. He's like, we didn't tell the shareholders we're going to do that. He's like, they're kind of furious. I was like, what? He's like, they could have sold the stocks for more money if they had known that you were going to do something so aggressive to grow the company. And I was like, oh my He's gosh. Like, you got to stick to the goals that are set now. And subconsciously in that moment, like I didn't walk out bitter, but I just knew that, you know what, I can't really be the person that adds the most value anymore in this organization. It just wasn't my type of thing. And for some people, they thrive in that environment. Honestly, most companies, the end goal is to get to that level, right? But I just realized that like being, for lack of a better term, maybe like a cog in the system, that just wasn't going to be me. So at year 10, I decided, hey, time to go. And Mark, that there's 5 years between like when I decided that when I actually left. So hopefully we'll fill in a little bit of the gaps here. But yeah, that's kind of like how corporate went. But as I said, till the last day I was there, I performed at 110%. I gave my all to that company and have no hard feelings or any negative thoughts about it. I loved every day of that job.
Well, one of the things that you said in the episode I was listening to was that it was this mindset shift going away from being held back to actually creating something, right? And I think there's something to be said for that feeling of creation, because I've been thinking about what it means to be an after-hours entrepreneur, what it means to be a side hustler, and turn that side hustle into your main source of income. And I really think it comes down to that, is we need to create, whether that's for legacy, for ourselves. It's something that's exciting. Bring it on a new client. Every time I bring on a new client, it's a very exciting time. The challenge is actually executing it, right? And as I was listening to this episode, again, I'll link to it below, so to create a little more context, you're mentioning failed endeavors, side hustles that fizzle out, things that just aren't working. And that's been my story really over the past 3.5 years, is trying all this different stuff, and nothing's really sticky, right? So take me back to that moment where you realized that you had something. Tell me, what was it about that particular endeavor and that project that you were working on that said this side hustle could be it? This could be the side hustle that...
Yeah, before I get into that, you brought up an important point, the idea of this creativity and trying things, right? So the reason it didn't work is because I didn't really know what else. I mean, aerospace for 10 years at that point. Like, what else are you good at that point? And so I just wasn't sure. So I tried things. Like I decided to do a web design agency. Found out I hated it when I started working with the client, right? I stopped that. I probably could have made money doing it. I started public speaking. I realized that grind of being on the road basically 24/7 to bring in a couple $1,000s each time you're speaking, just that to me wasn't going to be worth it. Like, there was all these different things that I tried, but what's important is the creativity of just exploring who you are. So for me, it was years of going on this journey, and some things just didn't work. Like I had some ideas. I was like, just had the wrong personality for it. Just didn't have the passion for it. But yeah, so like I try not to let it get me down, but sometimes I'm like, man, I'm really good in the corporate world, but I suck as an entrepreneur, like.
Well, I just want to say too, that I really think that for me, when I started that journey, and you kind of recognize that, like, gosh, this is going to hurt as I fall down this mountain and hit all these bumps. But I also saw it as like, just, you're continuously opening new doors, right? And you're learning new things, you're meeting new people. And it's almost like a ladder or a staircase that you're kind of walking up, right? I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it absolutely does. As a matter of fact, to take that a step further, I mentioned like having a web design agency to speaking. I still speak today at podcasting conferences. So that skill is valuable for me today. The other day, we needed to spin up a new page on the website. And yeah, I have a web developer, but I wanted to see if it even made sense to do it. In about 10 minutes, I spun up a new web page. People are like, dang, you know WordPress pretty well. It's like, yeah, I worked on it for a while. So like, I'm bringing those things with me. Like, I don't still offer web design services. I don't have like a speaker fee to go speak at events, but I hold all those things because they're experiences that I creatively sought after. So I think you're absolutely right, Mark. Like, there's no like, none of this was a burnt bridge where I'm like, I'm never touching a computer again. Like that. None of us have ever said that. Like, you use those experiences and you leverage them for where you're at in the future. So I'm glad you brought that up. And to fast forward back to your initial question there, at some point, something seemed like it was going to work. And what it was actually podcasting. I decided, you know what? I think I could be a better entrepreneur if I could learn from entrepreneurs that are better than me. And so what I did is I just started a podcast. It's a simple way to get free coaching. Like, there's people I wanted to meet who at that point, like, my company didn't want to pay for me to meet these people. But I was like, if I had a show and they let me interview them, I can ask them all the questions I'm wondering about entrepreneurship. So that was my idea. I was just like, let me start asking questions. And I just started learning at such a high level. Initially, I didn't do this, but I started actually reading these entrepreneurs' books before I'd have them on the show. So I have read their whole book. So I was asking like follow-up questions to the book, having them clarify certain things. And that just really got me interested in entrepreneurship in a different way. Like, it took me to a whole different level just from like my knowledge base. So I really invested heavily in a non-conventional way in my education of what it looked like to be an entrepreneur.
No, I love that. And I love that word, non-conventional. And I talk about this all the time with people, this, like, with the economy, what type of skills are going to be relevant. It's just always interesting to me that if you know how to read, if you have access to the internet, you have access to podcasts, you really have access to all the education you need to be incredibly successful in life.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Right. It's not about a college degree anymore, which is, again, one of the reasons why in college debt for that matter, but which is why it's really exciting to me when I see these people like yourself, Alex, who's taking control of their destiny, creating something meaningful and opening these doors. And correct me if I'm wrong, when you were able to leave that aerospace job and really go full time on the SaaS project, that was with Podmatch. Is that correct? Is Podmatch the company that let you go?
Yeah. That's right. And to like kind of backtrack on that, to like fill in the gap that I just created for us here. Basically what I did is I was learning from those people. And by the way, side note, man, like your show, I was just scrolling through some of the recent episodes. I'm about 3/4 of the way through with your Pat Flynn episode, which I know you've had him on like 2 or 3 other times. And then I saw like Cliff Ravenscraft and Adam Adams. Like these guys are just in like the most recent episodes. I'm like, why am I on this show? But anyway, honored to be here. But like that's education right there. That like, I mean, that is free. Like that is access to those people that you've given the world. So thank you for that. But again, to fill in the gaps, like when I got into podcasting, one, I was learning a lot about entrepreneurship through these people, like the people I just referenced that are on your show. But I also realized how much I loved podcasters. Like I became passionate about podcasting because every podcaster I met, like I came from a competitive industry. Aerospace is competitive. Yeah. But when I moved over to podcasting, it had this abundance mindset. I mean, everyone I meet would be like, what mic should I get? People are like, oh, I've got an old one that's really good. Here, you can have it. I was like, okay. I'm like, but I'm starting an entrepreneurship show and you have an entrepreneurship show. They're like, oh, that's great. I'll share about it when it's live. I was like, okay. And like just person after person was like, let me help. What can I do? How can I add value? Let me teach you this. Let me show you this. Like I immediately was like, I'm all in on this podcasting thing. The abundance mindset here is contagious. And I just became passionate about podcasting. So for me, talking about Podmatch, which is a service that connects podcast guests and hosts together for interviews, I built that because I decided I love podcasters. I'm going to identify something I can do for them specifically.
You know, it's funny that we talk about creators and this creator economy because you're right. It is that way. It's all about tagging and sharing, collaborating. That's another thing that you had mentioned is an understated value of having a podcast is that free coaching. I actually hit a plus sign on my timestamp that because I think it's going to be a good clip because I think people don't talk about that. The ability to have, I've had hours of time now with Pat Flynn, with Cliff Ravenscraft that no way I would have had access to without being in the podcasting industry. I do want to talk a little bit more about Podmatch though, because that's to me, again, I love podcasting. I do podcast production. That's what I do. Podcast rebranding, launches, things of that nature. But one of the hardest things to do is remove people from the processes. And I don't mean like we want to remove people, but automating, systemizing these processes is really hard. Finding guests, really difficult. So as you're kind of building up this infrastructure, as you're getting into this podcasting landscape some more, I'm sure you're recognizing that the collaborations and matching people together is really important, right?
Yeah, 100%, man. Couldn't say that any better.
So how did you start to systemize this?
Yeah, so for me, like obviously like anybody, especially when you first get started, finding guests is terrible. I mean, people are like, go reach out on LinkedIn. I reach out to 200 people and hear back from one and they would be saying no. You know, they're like, no, leave me alone. And maybe I had a bad pitch and I'm sure I did at that point. But regardless, I just remembered the pain. So like, again, when I decided to go all in podcasting, the only way I had to solve, to build a business is to solve a problem. So I said, you know what problem do they have? And I remembered that problem of mine. I validated that problem with other podcasters and then I offered a solution, which was Podmatch. And I just decided, hey, can we somehow streamline this process? It's just a mess. And so that's what we did. We do the matching, which it's not always a direct match or perfect, right? Like you have to still decide as the podcast host or the guest if it's the right fit. But if you decide that, you can message in the platform, you can schedule in the platform. You never have to exchange an email if you don't want to. Even the person's media files are available. So like if you're having guests on the show, you can pull their desired link, you can find their bio, you can find all their images, anything that you would need, including like frequently asked questions, like things that you can ask those people. It's all like there and good to go. The idea was, can we somehow just take the pain out of this part of podcasting so you can get quicker to what matters? Like what we're doing right now. This is what actually matters to the listeners, not how long it took you to find me. Like that doesn't serve them, right? So if you can streamline that along the way, then that's better for your listeners because it gives you more capacity to focus on the more important things. And for me, we want to take some of the pain out of podcasting because as you know, man, like it's still something like 90% of people who start fail in the first year. It might even be greater than that at this point. So can we somehow maybe make it 10% or 11% that make it instead of the 10%? I don't know. That's kind of like what we're going for right now, though.
No, I like it. Removing the friction, making it easier, making it simpler. The more people that we have podcasting, I think the better. I'm with you there. And so there's a few different softwares and platforms that help with this type of problem with finding guests. And one of the things that I think that's interesting about Podmatch is you have this like ranking system where it kind of like ranks how good of a match you are as a potential guest or as a potential host. I don't know if you want to expand on that, but I'm also wondering, what do you do differently at Podmatch that makes it a more effective place for me to find great guests, or more, even for me, more importantly, find great shows to guest on. I find that's a really high priority for me and other creators.
Yeah. I mean, if you're a podcaster or an aspiring podcaster, jump on some shows first. One, to make sure you like it, but also just to like really get good at sharing your message. Like, I'm a better podcast host because I've been a guest on a few hundred shows now. Like, that has made me better. And I'm still not great, but in another year or two from now, I might be great because of how often I'm doing this. But I'm also making sure that it's somewhere I can add value. I think that's the most important thing. But yeah, something we decided to do that was different was to have like that match algorithm. And it's got 39 different pieces of like, I don't know, algorithm. I'm not the technical founder, as you all can tell. I have a co-founder here. But anyway, basically built this thing to look at things like availability. Are they in different time zones? Do any of their time zones match up when they like to record? Is it a female-only podcast? Okay, then don't match a male to that female podcast, right? Is it age-specific? We cover, like, if there's a millennial podcast and they only interview millennials, we want to be mindful of that. We have actually a lot of retiree podcasts. So if you're under the age of 65, they don't even want to see you. So we basically built all this stuff into it. The idea was to have these 39 different pieces of criteria so we could really determine what a strong match is. Now, I don't know if that works better than what other people are doing. In all honesty, again, this being like an abundance mindset industry, I just consider us to be co-educators. Like, this is still like a new form of software that most people don't know exists. So the more of us out there spreading the word that they can do this instead of going the old fashioned way, the better at this point. So again, I don't want to dock anybody else for like, oh, they don't do this, they don't do that, or we do this that they don't do. But at the end of the day, we're doing what we think is best for our actual members. And we just continuously build the roadmap based off what they're saying and the feedback that they're giving us. But we've been very intentional with making sure that the match strength is something that continuously gets improved. And that algorithm just gets better and better over time.
Well, that's one of the reasons that I love entrepreneurship is you keep building foundation after foundation, kind of building it up. And it's just so cool to see something be created from nothing. I don't know. There's something so cool about creating something from nothing and seeing it built from nothing. Alex, again, you got Podmatch. You're looking at all these algorithms. You're looking at ways that guests are connecting. You're helping people connect with guests. You've been on hundreds of shows. I got to ask you, if I want to be a guest on podcast, what are some best practices?
Yeah. So there's a lot of best practices. First off, have a mic, have a camera if you're going to do a video podcast. And by the way, that's something we can filter by. Like, if you're like, I do not want to be on video, you can just say no video podcast, audio podcast only. Like, you can do that. But if you are, regardless, have a decent mic. And Mark, you know this, like, you can get a good mic for like $60. And it's like, actually, I can't think of the name of the one that everyone recommends, but there's some really good mics for just that cheap, right? Like, that's a good investment in yourself to do that. Don't just use the built-in with the computers. I mean, you can do that, but I just think it shows that you're a different level if you don't. So for me, the first thing is make sure that you're going to be really respectful of the host by having the gear that they would want, right? As a podcaster, we want our guests to sound great because listeners love to hear good quality. So I think that's the first thing.
Audio is key.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, you know this on the production side, like, it's hard to fix if someone's got a lawnmower going on in the background or their cat's purring the whole time, like sitting on top of the computer while they're recording. Like, that's hard to fix. I imagine you might be able to do it, but you're going to charge someone a little extra for that, right?
Yeah, well, no, the audio going in, like, there's only so much you can do. Give me some more. So let's say we've got a decent mic. What else can I do to be a great guest?
Yeah. So really listen to the podcast you're going to be on beforehand. I mentioned this, like, it's a little bit different because I do listen to your show, but I still today went back in and put those at the top of the queue so I could hear them. I want to understand how the host likes to talk to the guests. I want to understand how he refers to the listeners. That way I don't show up with the wrong mindset or attitude. I've been on some podcasts with some stoic people. I can't bring this level of energy to a stoic podcast. That's honestly that's poor form on my part. I need to slow down my voice. I need to share my story a little bit differently. And if I start getting loud, I just need to apologize. Oh, I still get really excited about this. Like, I need to do something like that. So listening to the show to understand the cadence that you need to be at, not to be someone other than yourself, but just to know what it's like when you're jumping in that conversation, I think is a really important element as well.
Well, yeah. Totally agree. Doing your research is absolutely huge. I want to talk. I want to get some more insights though from you, Alex, on how to actually get to that stage, right? So let's say I'm on Podmatch, or maybe I'm just on Instagram, LinkedIn. Like, I'm going to be reaching out to a lot of shows, and frankly, I get hit up all the time via email, all the time, like dozens a day. People that want to be on my podcast, or they want people to be on my podcast. What are some other ways that I can break through that gatekeeper and be on more podcasts? That's a goal of mine for this year. What are some other tips? Give me
Yeah.
Give me some quick wins, brother.
Man, I've got some stuff for you. First off, most people who send you those emails, the pitches are just so bad, right? Like,
horrible.
Like you read it and you're like, no, nobody that you ever know is allowed on my show now. Like, cause it's just so bad.
Right.
But you know, I got a few things like the pitch is really important. Like the way you do outreach. And the most common thing I hear in podcast guesting is, man, I can't get any shows to have me on their show. And I always first off say, because I used to be like, okay, well, let's figure out if it's the right kind of show. No, the very first thing is, what does your pitch look like? Like, what does it even look like that you're sending somebody? And I'll tell you what, 90% of the time, or even higher than that probably, when people send me the pitch, that is absolutely the problem. It's longer than any book it's longer than the Bible. It's like 4,000 pages. I'm like, no one wants to read this bio. Like, this is terrible. So I'll kind of give you my framework that's worked really well for me. I'm still consistently tweaking this, but this has helped me a lot. The first thing is to lead with value. Like the very first thing you have to do is lead with value. So if I'm going to reach out, I'm not going to be like, hey, my name's Alex Sanfilippo. I'm going to say, hey, Mark, really enjoyed your show. And as a matter of fact, I'm going to go beyond that and actually leave a review of it. I'm going to reference the episode I listened to. I'm going to leave a review on the show. And I'm actually going to send a screenshot with that message I send out. So I'll usually upload it to like my Google Drive and I'll just get the public link and I'll send it there. So really enjoyed the show. It really spoke to me. I decided to leave you a review. Thanks so much. Something really short like that. The next thing I do is I make a meaningful request because so many people, they beat around the bush. Like they don't actually ask to be on the show. They just kind of like, oh, it'd be really cool to be on your show one day. Did I mention it'd be cool to be on your show? No, I straight up say, hey, I'd love to be on your show, but I go a step further than that. I look at the recent episodes of that show to see if they've covered topics that I think that I could cover, or if there's gaps that I know that I could fill. Recently, I had somebody, they have a podcast for podcasts specifically, and they haven't had somebody on to talk about SOPs since June 2015. And I told them that. I'm like, hey, I listened to your episode back on June 2015 and realized it's been almost 7 years or 6.5 years since you've talked about that topic. That's one that I love to cover. Do you think it'd be valuable to go back and talk about that again? If so, I'd be honored to be a guest. Like that's a meaningful request. Like I did my research, and I think that really helps a lot. The next thing to do is offer credibility. So if you know something, like go to LinkedIn, or anywhere at this point, if you go to any social platform, you can see who you have in common with those people. If you have a friend in common, like if I go to somebody you know, Mark, and I want to be on their show and mention, oh, and just for credibility's sake, I'll literally say that. I was just on Mark's show last week. It was a really good episode. Here's a link to it if it's out, or it'll be out in a couple weeks. Because now what that did to that person, they now know, oh, Mark is awesome. If Mark trusts Alex, then I can trust Alex. Like it builds that credibility instantly. And the next thing that I'll mention here is to mention that you'd share the episode. So yeah, I'd love to record if it makes sense to you. I'd absolutely love to share the episode on my social, and I'll send it out to my email list as well. I just think it'd be really valuable for everyone to hear. That's for a host. It's like, okay, this person's saying they will share, which is really hard to get people to do, right? They're upfront telling me they will share. And then the last thing, number 5, the last thing I'll mention is to make it easy to say no. Make it easy to say no. What I mean by that is a lot of people tell you don't do this, but I tell people the opposite. Literally say in it, and this is what I say, hey, no pressure, of course, I only want to be on the show if I can add value. So just tell me if it's a no problem either way. Thanks again for the consideration. And I throw that in there because now I don't get the silence. Because here's the thing, about just the first 4 steps, no one wants to break my heart now because they're like, man, he put it all on the line. So they just would rather just ignore it. So sometimes I hear a no, but I hear back when usually they wouldn't respond, but I gave them room and permission to tell me no without it hurting my feelings. And that's actually helped me a lot and open up some dialogue to some other things we can do when I can't be on the show, but how we can collaborate. So those are my 5 steps, man. I know I just went on like a crazy rant there, but I hope that was somewhat valuable for everybody.
No, that's hugely valuable. And that last thing that you said, Alex, is interesting too. The idea of leaving open an opportunity for the host of that show to decline your request. The reason that kind of makes sense to me is because, like you said, sometimes someone's putting so much pressure to be a guest on your show that it gets uncomfortable and you just ignore them. I had someone on LinkedIn who is like really heavily pressuring me to be on the show, and I don't know this person. They just started reaching out, and we had a short dialogue on in DMs, but it was nothing like definitive, like, yeah, you can be a guest, right? It was kind of like, here, fill out this request form, da. But now they're just kind of blowing me up, and it's kind of like, I just want to avoid. So I think above all, it's just trying to open up that conversation, right? Mm-hmm. Get that going. Kind of like when building a business, the first dollar is the hardest. Once you get the first, then the rest come easy. Same, I think, with conversations. Once you get the first opening, it leads to more, which, by the way, Chris Doe, I'm gunning for you, bro. I love you on Clubhouse, and I'm going to keep breaking down that wall. You're coming on the show, Chris, pretty soon. Okay. Okay, so let's kind of move on. Alex is generous, giving us a little bit of extra time. Again, if you are looking for great places to be a guest on podcasts, if you want to find places to match with people, podmatch.com. Podmatch.com. Go to podmatch.com, just like Alex's shirt says, that's podmatch.com. So Alex, one of the reasons I wanted to invite you on the show is because I've been watching and liking what you've been doing with Podmatch, but you also just launched a new SaaS project called Podcast SOP, Standard Operating Procedures, right? Podcast SOP. Tell me a little bit about this. Why did you start Podcast SOP?
Yeah. So same thing, like I mentioned, I am passionate about the podcasting industry. So I'm going to always be looking for problems to create solutions for in this industry. And so now like my network is Podmatch. So I do a lot of time with those people, but I realized that a certain percentage of hosts would disappear every month. And at first I was just like, oh, I guess that's just churn in SaaS, right? That just means people are just dropping off and disappearing. But I was like, I want to find out why they're leaving, because I thought maybe it was a problem with the software. So I started just emailing these people one at a time and like, hey, saw you left, like no big deal. Like again, like leaving room to be nice. I'm like, no big deal. Just wanted to know like what made you leave. And it was almost every single time. It was rare that it wasn't this. Oh, I actually decided to stop podcasting. And I was like, oh, okay, that makes sense why you'd leave then. Like, yeah, I'd leave too if I wasn't podcasting anymore. But I just heard that time and time again. And finally I just started asking. I was like, well, let me find out why people are stopping. And the first thing, Mark, that you know is it's everyone kind of has, not everybody, but a lot of people have like a false expectation of the monetization that comes with podcasting. Like many of us think that within 6 months we'll be able to quit our job and just focus on podcasting full time. And that's just not the reality of the beast. I mean, it's not. Like there are ways you can do it, but it's not what most people think when they get into it. And Podcast SOP doesn't solve that problem. But the next most common thing I heard was the stress involved in producing a podcast. And that's why I always tell people, like, use someone like Mark who is going to take that pressure away so you can just stay passionate about it instead of getting bogged down. Super important, but not everyone, as you know, not everyone will invest in themselves in that way. So I wanted to find some sort of opportunity for those people that wanted to still feel like they're somewhat in control. And so we built Podcast SOP, which literally helps podcasters release podcast episodes. It's funny, Mark, initially what I did actually is I was recommending people to use like Monday.com or Asana or Basecamp or Trello. Like I was telling them all that. The problem was if you don't have experience with those and you're already stressed about podcasting and I just gave you something that literally does 20,000 different things, that does not help your stress at all. So I was like, I can't recommend this. So we literally built a service. It's basically project management software, but the only thing it does is help you release episodes on time. That's the sole focus of it. And again, we just saw the need. We want to help more people continue podcasting because like you, I believe that like the independent voices that come out through podcasting is the greatest value that's getting out of the world right now. And I do not want to see that stop.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. Podcasting is so powerful and we don't know exactly where it's going, but I love the idea of making it easier because I think that's every time I talk to somebody, it's always how much work is this going to be? How much time is this going to be? And, you know, I think looking to automate is always a good way because if you're recommending people use Monday.com or Asana, that's a beast. That's a beast. My team uses Monday.com and that's a whole other job. That's a whole other job, you know, figuring out, managing, onboarding, keeping my team in line there. So really like what you're talking about with Podcast SOP. So give me a little bit of the framework here. What are like the main podcast SOPs? Are we talking about like a checklist? Do I sign up and like, do I automatically set up my RSS feed? Like, what does the experience look like? What's the vision? I'm curious.
Yeah. So we actually have some pre-built templates that you can use. So when you do register, you basically hit a dashboard and ask you to add your first template. Then you can add an actual episode. And these templates and these episodes, they are a glorified checklist. So basically it's a predetermined one. So let's just say I have 10 steps in my podcast from like record to edit, to make cover art, to write, to release, all those things. It's 10 different things. Every time I hit add new episode, I can select that template that's mine and it'll populate it. And if I have predetermined due dates for each of those things based off of like the actual release day of the episode, it'll automatically tell me when I need to do everything. I can check it off as I go. I can comment. If I have team members, I can add them and assign them to it. So it doesn't just have to be me. And the idea is just here's a glorified checklist for every single episode that you have. And like I said, we have some pre-built templates. So someone's like, I have no freaking idea what to do, right? You can basically go to like our template gallery and select one. We do find the majority of the time though, people already have their own idea. They have it on a piece of paper. They have it on their whiteboard. They have it in Excel, right? And they basically just put that into Podcast SOP. So every time they have a new episode, add new episode, put in the title, put in the episode number if you want and the desired release date or the estimated release date, which you can change at any point. And then boom, automatically here are the things you do. For me, there's 28 things I do every time I release an episode. Automatically populates, automatically assigns to my team members. I can upload different audio files and video and stuff directly to it. And the big thing we did there is it doesn't compress, which was big for me. Cause like if you start sending things like over email and stuff like that, like it automatically compresses like the video files down or the images down. So you like by the time the last person gets it, the file is like not corrupted, but it's like more pixelated maybe, right? So we like do zero compression, just make sure it stays
So you handle
quality.
storage?
Yeah, we do. Yeah.
Wow.
Which, yeah, most people, they learn that, they're like, this is cheaper than buying like a member, buying something like a Google Drive account. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. When people catch on to that, they actually abuse it a little bit, but it's fine. We built it for that. So
fair enough. Super interesting because, as we're kind of explaining how podcast SOP works, I one of the challenges I think of is that as a podcaster, you're still using multiple platforms, right? I still have, my podcast distribution with Buzzsprout, and I have my YouTube channel, and I have to post to social media, and I'm doing my recordings in Riverside and whatnot. So they're still kind of pooling. Do you have automation built in already? Or, I look at, Calendly, for example, calendar booking. Do you have ways that all of this gets kind of like automated now, or is that something you're looking to build out in the future, maybe through programs like Zapier, or where are you at?
So Zapier is something we're looking at. So we are still in like version 1 of this thing. I mean, I'd say we're in a decent beta at this point. But that's like the next phase of it. Right now, what you can do is you can add links to it. So we have a lot of people that automatically just like link to like, they literally like, I use Buzzsprout as well. I link to like the add new episode thing. So I like when I get to that step, I just click the link. So we kind of have that all built into it. So people are adding like their links right now, but at some point we plan on tying it all together using Zapier. We're not going to go build our own. They've done incredible work. That, for lack of it, if someone doesn't know, like Zapier literally just ties different websites together. It like, I don't know what it does with the code, but basically mixes it all together and says, okay, you can use this automatically now. So yeah, we're going to use that to like tie into basically anything that you could possibly need. Like if you're using Riverside, like we want to tie it straight into Riverside to generate your actual meeting. Cause like you're saying, yeah, like there's still 10, some people use like 15 different things for podcasting. The idea is like eventually make that like podcast SOP is where you go and everything else links out from there or automatically is created from there.
Very, 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 very interesting. That's a lot of varies there. Alex, I feel kind of honored to bring you on here because I see the trajectory, the momentum. I see these different things that you're building. I see this vision, podcast SOP, automations, making podcasts more simple, factoring right together with Podmatch, getting guests more simple, building an ecosystem and a community there. And this is all under the umbrella of Pod Pros.
Correct. Yes. Right? Thank you for knowing that. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Pod Pros. Super interesting, Alex. So before I let you go here, I do want to ask you, Alex, if I'm getting into podcasting and I'm listening to this episode, I'm starting to put together my procedures. I'm starting to think about how podcasting can impact my life professionally, and podcasting can lead me out of being an employee. How do you think my mentality should be like? Let me reframe this question. If I want to use podcasting to quit my day job, what should my mindset be? How can podcasting get me there?
Yeah, for me, everything starts with why. Like, I know that's like a really overused term maybe, but you have to figure out why you want to do podcasting. And for me, podcasting is something that has to be value driven because you're going to be impacting people that are listening. Because if you don't have listeners, then you don't really have a podcast, right? So you want those listeners, but you have to figure out why you're doing that. Like what value are you going to add to those people? When you can figure that out, it's important to keep that the main thing because that becomes your main thing immediately. Like how can you continuously keep that in focus? So using tools like Podmatch or Podcast SOP just streamlines the rest of the process so you can stay focused on delivering your why to the people that are there, right? That are eventually going to bring you to the point where you're able to leave maybe the corporate world. And then also investing in yourself along the way. Like Mark, you doing production, more people should be using production. People are like, oh, it has a cost to it. I'm like, yeah, well, is your goal to save money or to build like an empire with what you're doing? Because to build an empire, you're gonna have to spend some money along the way. Be willing to invest in yourself. For me, I have a lot of outsourced investments that people are like, wow, you don't do that? I'm like, no, my job is to stick to my why, which is to impact people that are listening. It's to educate podcasters. That's what I'm here to do. So I'm going to stick back to that whenever I can. So for me, man, it all begins with really getting your why very clear and then figure out anything you can do to help you stay focused on that by outsourcing and automating as much as you possibly can. I think when you can get that right up front and consistently be focused on that, returning to the reason that you're doing it all right over and over again, I think you can do really well in podcasting.
Alex said it, and I agree with it. And Alex, I am definitely patiently, not even patiently, I'm just sitting here going to watch the ride of the entire PodPros, Podmatch, Podcast SOP, SaaS projects continue to improve, because it is needed. We need to make podcasting more simple. That's what I'm trying to do on an agency basis. And I love what you're doing on the tech side of things. Alex, thanks so much for joining us today.
Mark, thank you so much for having me, man. It was an honor.
Wow, I hope you enjoyed this episode with Alex just as much as I did. Just like Alex was saying, every time I get on the show with someone else, it inspires me. It gives me more drive. It gives me more vision to take the steps that I need to improve. So I feel very blessed to chat with someone like Alex, who's just really taking steps. And listen, I just want to encourage you. You can do this. If you're trying to find a way to make podcasting happen, you can absolutely do it. If you want to systemize it, if you want to simplify, I could definitely help you there. Hit me up, mark@marksavantmedia.com. I'm here to help you simplify your podcast production. You have an awesome show that it's branded, it sounds good, it looks good. It's the type of thing that you can brag about to your friends. Go to mark@marksavantmedia.com. Hit me up. I want to talk to you about it. All right. I'll catch you here next time on the After Hours Entrepreneur. Thanks for subscribing. Thanks for leaving a 5-star review. This is Mark Savant signing off. Peace.